Hello, this is Kenny Williamson, and welcome back to another episode of Melchizedek Chronicles. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about a subject that I'm interested in. Of course, I'm interested in lots of things. This is just one of the many, and that is wristwatches. I've always liked wristwatches. I've always liked clocks. It's just something I've always been into. If you watch and have been watching my episodes, which lots of you have, I talk a lot with my hands. I have to move my hands a lot to speak, apparently. That's what I've been told. I've been told several times, like, you couldn't even speak if you didn't move your hands. If your hands were tied behind your back, you couldn't even speak. That's probably the case. However, if you've seen the videos and me moving my hands around like I do, you probably noticed that I do wear a wristwatch lots of the time. This is an automatic wristwatch that I bought, 10, 12 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when I used to work over there. And it's an Omega. This one's called an Omega Planet Ocean. And and you may not have even heard of an Omega. Some people have, some people haven't. It's not a Rolex, it's an Omega. But what I wanted to talk about with this Omega, which I thought was interesting, is, I pay attention and I watch these different watch shows, and, they sell Omegas and they work on them, and Rolexes and everything else. Every kind you can imagine. Real expensive ones. This is not that expensive. So it's interesting. So what I wanted to tell you about this one is I think it's a funny story, is also, if you've been following the channel. If not, that's fine. But if you have, you know that I think it was in October, I went to Dallas, Texas, to a thing called TrutherCon 2025. Now, in that particular little thing that I went to, it was 2 or 3 days long. They had all these different speakers. Flat Earth Dave was there. Witsit Gets It was there. A whole bunch of guys that are into that kind of stuff was there. And me, of course, I'm a truth seeker, so I was there. So on the way back, I'm sitting at the airport, and a guy sits next to me because we're waiting on the flight, and his flight actually left before mine did. And he was looking around, and I'm just sitting here, like this, with my arms crossed, got my hand on my bag, and he says, "Excuse me, sir." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Is that an Omega watch you're wearing?" And I'm like, yes, it is. He said, "Well, what model is that?" I said, "It's called a Seamaster Planet Ocean." He asked if he could see it, and he'd been sitting there a while, so I didn't figure he was going to take off with it. So I took it off and I handed it to him. And he's like, "Yeah, I really like this watch. I've been thinking about buying what he called a big boy watch." He said, I'm wanting to get either an Omega or a Rolex, or he named off several others that I can't even pronounce the names and I've never even heard of. And he said, "Yeah, I really like the Omegas." He said, "However," he said, "I've got one reason I was going to get an Omega." He said, "Now I don't think I want an Omega anymore. I'm not going to get one. I don't like them anymore." And so, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, it all has to do with their moon watch." And I was like, of course, you know me, right? I mean, I'm a conspiracy theorist, obviously, which I don't believe is conspiracy. I don't believe we went to the moon. Everybody knows that. I don't believe you can get to the moon. So to hear this from a total stranger in an airport, he says, "That moon thing." And I said, "What about it?" He said, "Well, I don't believe we ever went to the moon." I was like, "Really? You don't believe we went to the moon?" To me, you don't hear that very often. Now, if I'm talking about it with a group of like-minded individuals, then yes, I hear about it. But a random stranger come up to me and say, at an airport, and say, "I don't believe we went to the moon," to me, that's just over the top, right? But it all started with the watch. And so he was like, "Yeah." He said, "I don't believe we went to the moon." And he explained that. And he said, and Omega claims their watch was on the moon, and they have a moon watch. So I don't really want to have a watch, or even from a company that produces watches, who claims they had a wristwatch on the moon when I know we didn't go to the moon. So they're liars. So, of course, I had to say, well, now hold on a second. I too believe that the moon landings are fake. And I don't think that Omega as a company knew anything about it. And now that this fake hoax has been going on for, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, whatever it's been now, from 1969 or whatever to now, you do the math. It's like, of course, they still sell Moonwatch. And the original Moonwatch supposedly had some kind of a plastic lens that wouldn't break. And you can buy a new one now, they call the Moonwatch, that has like a regular sapphire crystal like this one, because it's supposedly like a replica, one they went to the moon with. But you ain't going to the moon, so you don't need the special crystal. You see what I mean? A regular watch crystal will suit you just fine. So, I thought it was really, really interesting. So I said, well, I'm a moon landing denier myself. Don't believe it. Don't even believe we can get to the moon, but that's a whole nother issue. But, for baby steps, right? Baby steps for these guys. I don't believe we went to the moon. But I don't believe Omega knew anything about it. In fact, that's what I wanted to do this podcast on, because I got to thinking about that. And that's been a while. It's been a couple months ago. But it came up again. Something else came up as I've been looking at some watches. And somebody mentioned a moon watch again. I'm like, oh, yeah, the moon watch. That's right. So I thought I'd do a little digging and investigation exactly what happened with this moon watch. So here's the information that I found out. Okay. So number one, right off the bat, Omega never claimed, hey, we've got a moon watch. What happened is NASA supposedly, okay, and I'm sure this really happened, in the 60s, they started looking for a watch that their astronauts could take on their space missions. So this happened in the 60s, and they were looking for a reliable watch, or chronograph as they called it. Supposedly, they needed this thing for backup timing for engine burns and fuel checks. They needed it for EVA timing, which is, what is that? Extra vehicle activity, a spacewalk, in other words, or any emergency procedures if the electronics failed. Now, keep in mind, these moon vehicles, they had all their computers added up together, had less computing power than like a calculator. So these things are pathetic by today's standards. And I mean pathetic, okay? So, NASA decides that it wants to buy commercial, off-of-the-shelf watches, not prototypes or nothing special or customized. They wanted to have something that you could just go buy. So, NASA sends a guy out, an engineer, named James Reagan, according to the research, and he was tasked with buying a bunch of different high-end, at the time, watches and testing them. So this happened circa, 1964. So he goes out. You have to excuse I've got a cough drop in my throat. Every time I do a podcast, my throat locks up, it seems like. So I've got a cough drop in my mouth. And it's moving all around. So he anonymously purchases these different watches. He doesn't tell anybody what he's doing, and he goes to a retail jewelry store of some kind, somewhere, and he buys these watches. Well, the list of the watches he bought was an Omega Speedmaster, a Rolex Daytona, a Hamilton, And there's other one called I don't even know how to pronounce it. Something Longines Whittinger, something like that. And he also purchased some other ones, but apparently they just disintegrated right off the bat. So it was down to like these four. So let's see here. He gave these watches these different tests, these brutal tests, as they called it. And so they had to be like in plus 200 degree Fahrenheit for a couple of hours, 0 degrees Fahrenheit repeatedly. They had to be subjected to a near zero pressure, which is supposedly space conditions. They had to pass different shock and vibration tests, like a high G acceleration and violent vibration simulating rocket launches. You know how violent those rockets get, the real slow, and then they go over, then down, right into the Bermuda Triangle. You know those rockets? Yeah. Since they land in the Bermuda Triangle, I guess they need to be waterproof too. So they also supposedly had to be, subject to 95% humidity for days, oxygen-rich environments, and all different pressures. So according to this information that I found on Wikipedia and NASA's website and Omega's website, supposedly all of these watches failed except the Omega. It's the only one that took a licking and kept on ticking, if you've ever heard that before. So the Rolex Daytona supposedly failed due to lubrication breakdown and timing issues. This Longines Whittinger, however you pronounce it, I have no clue. It stopped under extreme heat. The Hamilton, it could not handle shock or vibration. And the Omega Speedmaster, it kept running within spec. So in 1965, NASA officially certified the Omega Speedmaster as flight qualified by NASA for all manned space missions. So, this is a documented NASA designation. This is not a marketing slogan by Omega. So at this point, Omega, after all these things are being tested, apparently they don't even know their watch is being tested because this guy bought them retail, bought them anonymously, and he's just testing them. So Omega doesn't even know they've got a moon watch at this point. So, then before the Apollo, the pagan Apollo, Apollyon, satanic, before those missions, they had the Gemini missions, which had supposedly, allegedly, spacewalks, docking maneuvers, and extended missions in space. And all of these astronauts that were on these missions here, these Gemini missions, they were wearing a Speedmaster, an Omega Speedmaster. And according to them, the watch proved itself repeatedly in real space conditions. Now, that's according to NASA. Now, if you ask me, I would say that's a bald-faced lie. I would say they never went to space, and the watch has never been in space. But according to NASA, the watch was in outer space. Now, that's the information that Omega has to go on. They're like everybody else. They're like, oh, you've got an Omega watch and it's in outer space? Well, they don't know. They're not out there to see it. So then let's roll up to the Apollo and the Moon mission, which was 1969. So Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong both had Omega Speedmasters on. And what they did is they took off the strap the band like this one has, and they had a long Velcro strap on it. So they have a picture of Neil like in the moon thing, and it's all wrapped around his wrist, see, because this thing is supposed to go on the outside of the moon suit, the space suit, and it's like this big around. So this watch has to go around it. So it's got this really long Velcro band. So that's what they've got. So they've got them all wrapped around their wrist when they're wearing them. Well, according to NASA's official story, Neil Armstrong had one on and Buzz Aldrin had one on. They both went out onto the moon. Neil Armstrong went first. He's the one small step for man, one giant leap. That whole look at me, I'm on the moon, but it looks like I'm on a movie set, filmed by Stanley Kubrick, that whole thing. So he hops out of the lunar module. But guess what? He doesn't have his watch on. It was left supposedly inside of the lunar module as a backup timer because the timer in the module had failed. And it's funny because I saw a picture of this years ago. I couldn't find it now, but it claimed that the timer in the module was a Bulova. It had like a clock up there and it said Bulova on it, and it stopped. So it's like, I don't guess they tested that one. I guess they thought, well, it'll be inside the lunar module, right? So, and it's air conditioned and heated, basically like in an apartment complex, apparently, an apartment on the moon, so don't need to be space certified. Well, it quit. So he had to take his and strap it up for timing purposes. Okay. I mean, this is a good story. Only two people that can corroborate this are the two, Masons that went to the moon. Okay. So Buzz then comes out and he has his on, and there's pictures of it with him with it on, a wristband, and it's got a watch face on it. And so he wore his Omega Speedmaster on the lunar surface during Apollo 11. So that officially made it the very first watch worn on the moon. So, according to them, Omega didn't officially claim they had a moon watch until after that mission, because before that, you see, it was simply just it was a watch. It's just a tool. They didn't actually realize, oh my goodness, the guy's wearing it, on the moon. Now we've got a moon watch. So there we have it. So supposedly, again, later on in Apollo 13, which, you can watch from Hollywood, with Tom Hanks. We've got all the pedophiles running around pretending to be astronauts. During the Apollo 13 mission, the onboard systems all failed. And then the astronauts used a Speedmaster to time a 14-second manual engine burn to correct their trajectory, safely returning to Earth. Like the typical Hollywood fashion you get. Of course, that was Tom Hanks that did that. But according to the thing I read, in the movie, he's wearing a Rolex in the movie. I haven't paid attention. I need to go check that out. But either way, according to NASA, he was actually wearing an Omega Speedmaster. So, NASA then credited the Speedmaster with playing a role in saving the crew. And Omega later received a NASA Silver Snoopy Award, whatever that is, for this. So they got a little award from NASA about the Speedmaster. Okay, so let's go on to the next. Oh, now what I have here is I have a picture. If you can see this, let me see if I can get it up. This is a picture of Buzz Aldrin in his moon lander. And he has his, he's wearing on his left arm, apparently. I wear mine on my right because I'm left-handed. So he's got it there. You can see the strap. It's all wound around. And there's a big picture on the right here of what the watch looks like. Also on that same hand, of course, unless this thing's inverted somehow, he has a ring on his finger right there, and you can't see it on here, but if you go to the NASA website, this is on their pictures for Apollo. You can zoom in. It's a lot better picture. And that ring is a Masonic ring, and it has a square and compass on it. It's a gold ring with a red inlay with a gold square and compass with a G on it. So it's funny because I did a little research to say, because I hear that all the time, was Buzz Aldrin a Mason? Oh, there's no proof of that. He never admitted that. I say, well, he's wearing a Masonic ring on his finger with a square and compass. I know lots of people who used to be Masons, and that's the same ring they're wearing. So, I went on to AI and asked it some questions. They're like, oh, no. I was like, well, that is a Masonic ring, no matter what you say. Okay, you can go see it for yourself. So anyway, there he is. He's in his little lunar module or whatever he's supposedly in. And there he is. He's practically bald. What's funny is all the pictures of him today, now that he's like 80 or 90, well, he's got nearly a full head of hair. So I'm not sure why we know he was supposedly like 30. He's basically got a horrible receding hairline, but today he's got hair there. So somehow he grew hair back. Not sure how that happened. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's through all those Van Allen radiation belts he went through. The radiation sizzled his head a little bit, and his hair miraculously grew back. Not sure. Not sure how that happens. How you see people, it's kind of like Joe Biden. He don't hardly have any hair in one picture, and the next picture he's got a full head of hair. It's like, wow, how do these rich politicians and astronauts, how did the hair grow? Are they getting their hair implanted or something? Maybe. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe we should look into that. Anyway, so on to the next saga here about the Moonwatch. So let's go on to the next section here that I have. Okay. So we've established Omega's a Moonwatch. We've established how Omega became a Moonwatch. Now, what happened to the Moonwatch, you ask? Well, it got lost. So here's the story of what happened to the legendary Omega Moonwatch. Let's see. It vanished. So after Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin's Speedmaster was given by him to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. And this was going to be a part of the astronaut memorabilia display. So multiple different accounts, including Buzz, says that he sent, I guess via mail, UPS, USPS, not sure, to the Smithsonian. So he mailed it off to him, and it never arrived. So it's widely believed that it was either stolen or lost in transit, and that was in the early 1970s that this happened. Now, the Smithsonian now does have other Apollo-era Speedmasters, but Aldrin's moon surface watch is still missing. So, and here's what happened there. Well, let me see here what else. What else do I have here? Right, we've already went over this. Neil Armstrong's watch was left in the lunar module as a backup timer, so Aldrin's often described as the first watch actually worn on the moon's surface. making it one of the most historically valuable wristwatches ever. And of course, it disappeared. Supposedly, over the years, people have claimed to have had that watch, but it turned out to be not the case. So, the other article I read here, which I don't see it in front of me, but I remember reading it, Buzz is interviewed, I think it's in his book, and he's talking all about this and how he had sent it to him, and of course it got lost. And so it's never been found again. So he reported that, and then at that point, NASA perks up and they're like, oh, well, we need to recall all watches that we've put out there. Any watch that was in the Apollo program or has anything to do with the moon, we need it back. So all of these other astronauts were forced to turn in their watch or anything to do with this stuff. Remember that. So they all had to turn it all in. So now none of them have anything. And in his little book that I read, this article that he was talking in, he said, they were kind of griping and complaining about it. They were upset that they had to give their watches back. But NASA's like, now, those are our watches. That's government property. So they had to return them. That's the story. So there you go. There it is on Omega. Now, if you want to know my thoughts on it, you already know what my thoughts are. They never went to the moon. There's never been a wristwatch on the moon, and there never will be because you can't get to the moon. So that sums that up. Now, do other people believe we went to the moon? Of course they do. Did he really send the moon watch, or did he keep it, or did somebody steal it? Don't know. Somebody probably stole it, intercepted the package, was like, oh, he's mailing this stuff off, and went through the package away. I don't know. So they believe it, and they think they've got a watch that was on the moon. Now, NASA comes back now, and they say, oh, we've got to have that stuff back. We have to have it back. Why do you think that is? I have a theory. About that. I'm going to tell it to you right now, because I know you want to hear it, right? You see, this is an automatic watch. Okay, it's just a wristwatch. I watch different YouTube videos on watch repair, watch cleaning, just watches in general, because like I said, I like watches. Well, what I've noticed is you take a wristwatch, these guys are pulling them apart, and they're absolutely filthy. So you've got a watch like this one that hasn't been serviced in 10 years. I'm sure if they opened it up and pulled the links off, it would have all kinds of crud all up underneath it that you can't see right now and you can't get to until you open it up, and all of a sudden it just falls out of everywhere. So we know that's a fact. So imagine this same watch being on the moon for a while. Now, according to NASA, the moon dust up there is thick. It gets all over everything. It gets in everything. It covers everything. You can't get it off. It just embeds itself in everything. Supposedly got all in their space suits and all kind. Can't get the stuff off of you. Stains up the material because it gets in it and just stains it. You can't get it off. So, my theory is NASA was probably like, okay, we've lost our moon watch. We've lost one. What if a watchmaker opens up this wristwatch and a bunch of dust falls out? Moon dust. Are you following me here? Moon dust. And let's just say he gets a hankering to get it tested. And come to find out, it's not dust from the moon, but it's dust from over here in the desert. Or it's not dust from the moon, it's cement dust from the fake stage that was set up for the fake Apollo moon landing. So we don't want anybody testing the dust, in other words. That dust can never be seen by anybody other than us. So we need to get those watches back ASAP. So then you're thinking to yourself, well, would that really happen? Would they even care? Yes, they would. And here is how I know they would, because here is the next story. Now, this doesn't have to do with a watch, but this does have to do with moon dust. Okay? And so, let me get my article pulled up here. So, this came up on a podcast I listened to here a while back with Bart Sabrell again. I've got an interview scheduled for him that's coming up, so I'm going to mention this to him. He mentioned, about how NASA did and how strict they are with their moon dust and moon rocks. You see, because supposedly these astronauts came back with over 800 pounds of moon rocks. Now, during this time, they gave away little pieces of these moon rocks, like the marble size, in these plaques to all these different countries, and they have them on display. Keep in mind, they don't look anything like the moon rocks that they show pictures of. They look completely different. Well, one of these moon rocks that was given to a country, I can't remember the country. You can look it up. They actually wanted to get theirs insured or something. They took it out of the case and had it tested. And lo and behold, guess what? I think it's Dutch, the Dutch government. Lo and behold, it's fake. It's not even a moon rock from space. Would you know what it was? It was a piece of petrified wood. So NASA gave these people fake moon rocks. One person, one company, one government actually opened the thing up and tested it, and guess what? It's not a rock from outer space. It's not a rock from the moon. It's from right here on Earth, and it's a piece of petrified wood. That's all it was. So why would they do that? Well, probably because they're all fake, right? I mean, logically, there is no such thing as a moon rock. So everything they gave out was fake. So, of course, nobody's allowed to see, no normal, and in this podcast, the guys are like, well, how would we know? We can't test these we need to get some moon rocks in here and test them. That's never going to happen. There is no individual person that has a brain in their head that's going to get to test anything. The only people that get a hold of this stuff is other government people and people that are in on this scam. If you ain't in on the scam, you're not going to get to look at the thing except through a piece of glass. You're never going to get to touch it, let alone test it. So, one of the things they mentioned that happened to do with these moon rocks was a grandma, and I found the story, and it's real. There was a 70-year-old woman, and basically the news story was a grandma got busted for selling a moon rock. So the lady's name was Joan Davis, and she was an elderly California widow, and she somehow got caught up in the NASA Office of Inspector General. Didn't even know it existed. After trying to sell a tiny piece of lunar material embedded in a lucite or acrylic paperweight. Okay? So here's what happened. Joan Davis, this old lady, in her mid-70s, and this was in 2011, she was described as a widow and a grandmother. Her late husband's name was, let's see, what was his name? His name was Robert Davis, and he had worked on the Apollo program, but he worked for North American Rockwell. So he was some kind of an engineer or scientist working on the Apollo program. What he did is during this time in Apollo, he acquired, apparently legally, because this thing, he got it from NASA, from the Apollo program, and it was a paperweight like this big. It's a big, pretty big paperweight, and it's clear, like real heavy. And in the very center of this thing, it had a teeny tiny speck, smaller than a grain of rice. That teeny tiny speck was supposedly a speck of moon dust. Okay? I'm serious. Well, he brings this thing home and has it for years until he dies. And now she is pushing 80-year-old widow who is, needs the money. She lives in California. I mean, look what's going on in California. Of course, you're going to need the money over there, right? Taxes through the roof. I mean, God knows what's going on over there. So, of course, you're going to need the money. So she decides what her husband had left it to her, gave it to her, and she's like, well, I want to get rid of this thing. So she listed it somewhere, probably on eBay, and said, look, this is a teeny tiny speck of moon dust, came from the Apollo program. My husband brought it home. I want to sell it. So she was trying to sell it, and apparently she had an offer from a guy who offered her $1.7 million. And she's like, sold. So let's see here. So she wasn't really talking to a real buyer. She was talking to an undercover NASA guy. I mean, seriously, over a speck of dust trapped, sealed in a big, thick piece of lucite. So in other words, you ain't ever getting it out. Okay. I mean, think about that. Picture that. So let's see. So they investigate this for months, and they come up with an undercover buying. So they're going to buy it from her, and they're undercover agents. They're not real buyers. The meeting takes place at a Denny's. So she meets the buyer of a speck of moon dust at Denny's. And, of course, in Southern California, says it happened at Lake Elsinore, Riverside County area. Okay, and when she arrived with the lucite paperweight, agents moved in and seized the item. So this goes on to say she was not ultimately charged. NASA experts supposedly later confirmed that the lunar material was authentic, but the prosecutors did not file charges. Don't know why. Maybe because, she didn't steal it or anything. She got it from her husband as a gift. Apparently, no big deal. He walked right out of there with it. However, as of now, and as of when that happened, all Apollo lunar samples are treated as controlled government property. Private sales are strictly prohibited. In fact, any moon dust is treated as a national treasure, and it's a felony to have it if you're not NASA. It's theirs. So NASA says all moon dust and all moon rocks belong to them. It's theirs. So here we are, folks. If you're pushing an 80-year-old geriatric woman and you own a speck of moon dust, don't you even dare think about trying to sell it. Why? Because the federal agents will swat you, and you'll probably end up in prison for life. Now, she didn't, but surprised. All over a speck of moon dust. Now, they call it, whenever you read the articles, they keep calling it a moon rock. A moon rock. So, you're thinking of something this big, right? You're thinking of something the size of your fist, a rock. Oh, that's a big rock. It's not a rock. It's smaller than a grain of rice, like a grain of sand. A speck. If it was to fall on the floor, it would be lost forever. It would be literally a piece of dust blown away. So they actually conducted a sting and arrested somebody at Denny's for having a speck of moon dust in a paperweight lucite where you can't even get to it. Now, why would they do that? My theory is, which is the same as Bart Sobrell's theory, is they don't want even a chance of anybody cracking that thing open in the future and taking that little speck of dust and testing it and say, that's just a piece of sand right here off the floor. That didn't come from the moon. It's literally a piece of sand out of the driveway. It's nothing. There's nothing special about it. But see, somehow back in the 60s, this guy walked right out of NASA with it. It was no big deal. But see, back then, they had no idea the internet was even going to exist. They had no idea that people were going to be able to get online and find out that it was a hoax. They had no clue people could actually communicate about this and listen to a podcast about the fake moon landings. You see? And then people might actually investigate it. And people with way more stuff than they had back then can say, oh, let me have that. I'll just take it and test it right under this microscope right here. And They didn't think about that. So they didn't have to worry about controlling it. They figured it'd just disappear. Just a piece of sand, right? Who cares? Well, now, all of a sudden, a piece of moon dust comes up for sale on eBay. They're like, what? Somebody has some moon dust that's not us and not the Smithsonian? Well, swat them. Arrest them. I'm surprised they didn't just shoot her. I'm surprised they didn't show up with a SWAT team and just spray the whole place with bullets and kill everybody in the whole place. I'm surprised. That sounds more like what they would do. So if they're that ridiculous over a speck of dust, is there any wonder why they went and got all the watches and anything that went to the moon had to come back to them? Is there any wonder? Because a watch got lost? What if it has a speck of moon dust on it or in it, embedded in the bezel or embedded in the band? Well, somebody might test it. Somebody might realize where it came from. So, yes, that all that is a true story, by the way. But just think about that for a second. Supposedly, people can go to Antarctica and the desert and all kinds of places, and supposedly there are rocks from the moon, meteorites from the moon, which are nothing more than supposedly something has hit the moon and went poof and blew rocks up into the air, and these rocks have made their way back down to Earth. So apparently if you pick up a moon rock from the ground, you can have it. But if you have a moon rock that NASA picked up from the moon, well, you better not get caught with it, put it that way. You're a felon. They'll probably put you in a gulag somewhere and that you'll never be seen again. Why? Well, because, see, if you walk out there, this is my opinion, by the way. This is my theory. If you're walking in Antarctica, which you can't get there anyway, but let's pretend that you could, and you stumble upon a moon rock from outer space, and you pick it up, and you're like, I got me a moon rock. Got it right here. Well, that's fine. Because, see, if somebody tests it, and it turns out to be nothing more than petrified wood, they're going to say, well, of course, because you picked it up down there in Antarctica, and you don't know anything about it. You see, you're an idiot. So you didn't even pick up a moon rock. You just thought you did. That's because you're an idiot. Only NASA can pick up moon rocks. Don't you know that? Don't you know only NASA can get this stuff done? Not you. And you don't work for NASA. You're not a Mason. You don't have a top secret clearance. So you're never going to get to see a moon rock, except in pictures. So, obviously, you pick up a moon rock, they can say, you didn't really pick up a moon rock. You just thought you picked up a moon rock. But if you have a moon rock that came off the space shuttle, they're going to say, well, now this one's real, see, because we picked it up off the moon. Now let's test it. Oh, no. Oh, no. We test it, and we tell you that it's real. Everything goes through us. You know, that way we can control everything. So we can literally, you can be looking at a rock out of your driveway. But if we have it in our hands, it could be a moon rock, but you're never going to get to know the difference. You see? So they don't want the watch floating around because it could have moon dust on it. Now, that's my opinion. I don't know. So I don't know. You be the judge on that. However, all this to say, I met a guy at the airport who no longer wants an Omega watch because he thinks that the moon landing is fake. Well, I mean, kudos for that. But like I told him, I have an Omega and I believe it's fake, obviously. But see, Omega doesn't know that. Omega has to go by the same information that all these other people go by, propaganda, and they just assume it's true and it doesn't hurt. I was like, hey, you know, if 50% of the population believes we went to the moon and they were wearing an Omega when they did it, put it on the website. Hey, produce a moon watch. Maybe somebody will buy it. Mark that price up a little bit. After all, it's a replica that went to the moon. So maybe here in the near future, you know, we can come up with one that went to Mars, maybe, with Elon. Maybe Elon will take one to Mars, but he may not like Omega. I don't know. He may be wearing a Timex for all I know. Who knows? Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that thing out there. Yeah. Thanks for listening, by the way. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I need to get another podcast done, and it was interesting, and I like moon rocks. I like talking about moon rocks. I like talking about wristwatches. Like I said, I'm going to come up with another one with Bart Sabrell here real soon. We're going to talk about his interview he had with the astronaut. You know, I think it's going to be good. I think he was MK Ultra'd. Another guy thinks he's MK Ultra'd, but he may just be a liar. You know, it's funny on these astronauts. They're like Buzz and all these others. They're usually always Masons. A lot of times they're 33 degree Masons, which is the highest you can get. It's an honorary title. So you can go up to 32, but then you have to be promoted to 33. It's an honorary deal. You can't just buy it. So in order to be that level and have a top secret clearance, obviously, you have to be able to keep a secret. So you have to be very trustworthy with secrets, or you will never reach it to begin with. So it stands to reason that these Apollo astronauts are all in the same club, the secret keeping club. So they're either keeping the secret, of the, you know they are, but there's a chance they got MK Ultra'd at the same time. I don't know for sure, but either way, let me know what you think. Leave a comment. As always, before I get off of here real quick, there we go. There's a Flat Earth Bible on Amazon if you want to check that out. McKeel's Deck Chronicles by Dr. Kenny Williamson on Spotify and all other podcast platforms, by the way. There it is on YouTube. McKeel's Deck Chronicles by Kenny Williamson. And I'm also on Rumble. I'm also on Patreon. I need to get a picture of that up there too. Can't remember the name on that. I think it's the same thing. Anyway, hey, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email me at truthseekers2012@gmail.com. Check out itsflatbro.com. Check out truthseekersministry.org. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, God bless you.